Welcome back to the MedTech Snapshot, the one question, one answer, highly digest medical device podcast. Through these next 3 episodes that you'll be watching, Brad Maruca, Managing Director of Deloitte's MedTech Division, shares with us some really interesting topics having to do first and foremost with our OEMs and industry partners potentially making the wrong decision and strategy as it relates to how they focus on building their organizations and looking first at addressable markets and clinical outcomes. We also dovetail into episode number 2 on looking at bias and data bias, and for the fact that at the very end of the year, patient procedures and demand seems to uptick every single year. And why are we not talking about that a little bit more within the industry to build better strategies? And last but not least, Brad seems to be able to weave in an interesting story having to do with the boll weevil in his career. So stay tuned. Welcome back to MedTech Snapshot. With me today is Brad Maruca. I'm really excited to dive into this detail, but first, Brad, why don't we have you introduce yourself?
Sure. Travis, thanks for having me on. My name is Brad Maruca. I'm a managing director at Deloitte. Been here coming up on 4 years, August. Prior to that, I was in MedTech, so 26 years in MedTech. I spent 19 of those years in neuromodulation.
All right, Brad, this is my favorite part of the podcast and our discussions because I fib a little bit. I always tell people that you get 2 questions and then we're out, but there's actually a surprise third, so we'll have some fun with this.
Okay.
You, as we had talked about at the very beginning, you've done 26 whatever years in industry, and then you jumped fence, and now you're outside of industry supporting inward, which means you have a unique perspective to be able to look at OEMs and provide guidance. That said, the journey, though, along that career path is what I want to focus on, which is, can you think back on your journey, your career journey? Has there been a moment where, when you think back on it, that moment was so pivotal, it really became the catalyst for where you are today? It really just had a transition, and because of that, you could argue that you're now sitting here today talking with me. Perhaps not with me, but like in terms of your career trajectory. Any thoughts on that?
First of all, I can't believe you lied to me and told me it was going to be 2 questions and it was 3.
I know, it's terrible.
I will quote Mike Rousseau, who's the former president and CEO of St. Jude Medical, who told me directly that I navigated my career, I didn't manage it. And so I'm going to give you the perspective of somebody who navigated the career, and I'm going to give you probably one of my favorite examples of like what triggered the change for me. So if you've ever heard of Enterprise, Alabama, kind of a fascinating story. They are, to this day, the only city on the planet with a statue to a boll weevil. And this happened in the early 1900s when they were farming, and there wasn't much advancement in pesticides, and a boll weevil was destroying their cotton crops en masse. And that was the core of the income for this city. But what they found was they had other crops that were peanut crop, and they were impervious to the boll weevil. So they ended up ripping up the cotton crops and then replacing those crops with peanut, which was a high profit center for the Southeast. It became a core manufacturer and distributor and supplier. And it basically got them out of debt and put them on the map. And so they erected the statue of a boll weevil in recognition of something that could have been adversity and bad for them that turned out to be extremely positive for them. And so my boll weevil and what changed my career was we were in a warning letter. We had a massive recall. It was one of those ones where you would see commercials with like civil action lawsuits asking people to call in. Like, this was my life. But, we had chargers that we had to swap out at patients' homes, 55,000 patients' homes, go to their house, swap out their charger. Fascinating. So what it did for me was, as a catalyst for change, it became a massive way to think really carefully about the marketplace. So rechargeable devices were all the rage. They were 93% of our mix at the time. And we started to think about like pocket pain. We started to think about the inconvenience of charging. And we ended up entering into a market that was a recharge-free market. So these were non-rechargeable devices, and we shifted our mix like overnight. And the story for my career is less about that product. It's more about strategy, and how I became really intrigued that strategy isn't just something that you put on paper, put in a board deck and stick on a shelf. It should be thoughtful. It should have insight that you're generating from all areas of the business. There's usually a constellation of data that comes across different functional areas. And if you can harness that into an actual strategy, this is where the real insights, this is where real market leadership becomes. Now, my challenge at Deloitte, I will tell you, so my whole thing was I want to do strategy all day, every day, and across all of MedTech. So that was the career inflection point for me. That was the J curve. The difficulty sometimes with selling strategy is that nobody knows the strategy they didn't pursue. Unless a competitor does it, right? Other than that, they don't know what the potential outcome could have been. So for us, did we really know that non-rechargeable was going to completely transform the company? We were going to go to number one in market share in 1 year after launch, that we were going to grow 49% in that year by having a smart strategy and a product that fit that strategy? We didn't know that. So I will say, so for me, I understood the value of product portfolio management. I understood the resource that complaints could be in terms of informing what the commercialization, your training, the product design should be, and really digging deep into understanding feedback in the marketplace to make your decision, not just, what people might tell you. Like, they really can't tell you the product they want. You have to give them the product they need. This is kind of an Apple philosophy, right, Travis? But for me, that was the biggest thing. And so I feel like there's so much opportunity to develop smart strategy. And so I really wanted to do that all day, every day, and across all of MedTech. And that was, I think Deloitte was my biggest kind of pivot point, and the catalyst was that remediation, my boll weevil, the remediation of the Eon Mini back in the day.
So 2 comments there. Congratulations. You're the first person to ever bring up boll weevil on this podcast. I applaud you for that.
Thank you.
But perhaps more important, one of the takeaways I have from what you just shared is the intentionality you had behind some of the decisions you made in your career related to strategy. I think all too often we can find ourselves 10 years down the road in our career, and if we weren't intentional about some of the decisions we were making, what we find is our career manages us.
Yes.
Rather than us managing our career. So can you comment on that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, I think, talking about this concept of strategy to begin with, any of your sales rep and regional sales managers that listen to your podcast, I will tell you that oftentimes what gets blamed in poor strategy is usually poor sales execution. So they're blaming sales execution when they really just have poor commercial strategy. But I really do think it's important, and maybe it's the phase of career that I have. And so if I had to talk to myself, 20 years ago and being intentional, I was really attracted to solving problems. And I actually think that was really good for my career. So I would put into functions that were dysfunctional and needed to be fixed. And so I found that really valuable. Now I've shifted into, not only do I like to fix things, but I find that now I'm narrowing things down to what I love to do. And when you love to do it and you have passion about it and you do more of it, it's not that I'm going to love something and then I'm going to do it. I do it, I develop competency, and then I start to really love it, which is probably a Scott Galloway type of commentary to make, right? But it is true. You develop a competency and then you realize that it's unique. And so you and I, as we were kind of kicking this off, before we started recording, talked about the size of Deloitte. Right, that's 470,000 employees. We have 120,000 just in the U.S., 7,800 at my level. And so imagine this: you are 1 or 2 phone calls from a world expert in probably the most obscure and rare thing that you could possibly manage. And they do that all day, every day. And so I found that I think if I could look back, yes, I would have been attracted to problems. And then as you move forward and you do those problems, you develop a competency that's unique, and then you become passionate about it because it's so desirable. And so that's how that happens. It's not the love that happens first. It's the challenge that happens first, and then the knowledge that happens second, and then your love for it as you become more appreciated for having expertise in that area that happens last.